We live in a time of unprecedented pace and breadth of technological advancement, and startups long to tell their story of their techno wizardry. But customers actually don't care about your exquisite code, your super duper charged processor, your sensational SaaS user centric platform. Nope, they only care about the outcome, what you make happen in their world. Today's guest will share the 6 ways to humanize your tech story and shows you what happens in commanding market share when you do, like this techno-driven motorcycle brand. Can you guess who it is?
You'll see this beautiful Ducati, very well designed motorcycle. You'll see a whole culture and a lifestyle around the motorcycle, and it is creating a whole new generation. They're ticking off a lot of people in the marketplace because it is different, it is bold, it is badass, it is fearless, and it is innovation out of the box. But during the last couple of years, I mean, this is a company that has sold more than 40 million in orders before the products shipped.
Donna Loughlin is the founder of LMGPR and known for her work with futurists and innovators. She has launched more than 500 companies, taking them from stealth to market leaders since forming her PR agency in 2002. From her experience, she will share with you what she calls the difference between an acorn and a unicorn, and you might even figure out where you fall on that particular scale. Prior to forming her PR firm, Donna spent more than 10 years in Silicon Valley leading creative PR programs for global market leaders in the consumer and business tech sectors. Additionally, she held leadership positions with global PR firms like Burson Marsteller and Edelman Public Relations. Donna honed her journalism chops working for the Washington Post, NPR, Reuters, and BBC. A master storyteller, she enjoys exploring the human side of technology and how it is reshaping our society for the better. She also hosts the Before It Happened podcast, where she sits down with the world's brightest minds to inspire all innovators and futurists to live into their most powerful stories. So please welcome to the Business of Story, Donna Loughlin. Donna, welcome to the Business of Story.
I'm so excited to be here today, Park. Thank you.
It's great to talk to you because, as the show title says, this is how to humanize your tech story. And you have an amazing background in doing this. And my listeners, over 300 plus shows, have heard me say it time and time and time again. Whether you're in the tech world or something else, your story is not about what you make, but what you make happen in the lives, in the communities, and the colleagues or the people you serve. And that's what we're going to talk about today, and how you help your customers get to that same realization and tell their stories in a lot of different ways. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Well, that's, you just cast a really big net. I've been in the Silicon Valley, which is this kind of virtual demographic, right? But I'm smack in the center of the Silicon Valley, which was once called the land of heart's delight, because it was all agriculture. But as agriculture, started getting replaced by technology, the expansiveness of the valley changed dramatically. And I don't think it was until the early 60s when, the HPs and the defense companies were in the valley that the texture changed. And that was well before my time. But by the time I was out of college, I came back to the valley into what I call the land of alphabet soup. Because everything acronym that was used in an innovation in tech was really a different language. And my first job was a news reporter, and I basically covered tech and economics. And so I was tossed into the alphabet soup of tech chips, one of the most fundamental components. And I had to learn really quickly to separate what I needed to know and what the engineering or the techies thought I needed to know. And I had to separate it to what the market really needed to know and what I, as a novice and potential customer, needed to understand and know. And so that process was, very similar to like a journalism, storytelling process, But when you're given a big bucket of alphabet soup and you have to sift through it, one of the reasons I love your alphabet soup, which is the ABT, which is to me is like the ABCs of what we need to do. I stand back and I say, wow, if I'm going to actually help a company be able to distract or not distract but extract the core impact, the aha component of what they do versus how they build it, the innovation, how it works. I really want to know about the impact. What is it? Are you changing lives? How meaningful is this? Is it cause driven? Is it gonna purify and water and make it safer for the rest of us? Is it going to reduce fossil fuel or reducing fossil fuels and make food safer and cleaner and more palatable? But those are the things that I think are so important in looking at innovation and emerging tech.
You make me think of HBO's Silicon Valley. I imagine you watch that show. I laugh so
I live
hard.
it.
You live it.
That's
you
my
do.
life.
And I can relate it to the advertising world and a lot of the tropes that they run out there. But I remember that one tech event they were doing, and every tech leader ended their presentation about, we are going to make the world a better place. We're out to change the world. We're saving lives. And it became kind of a joke on, Silicon Valley on the TV show. Of course, it's hugely important out there, but how many of them really mean it?
Really mean that they're going to save lives?
They're going to save the lives. They're going to change the world, and everything is going to be better when their unicorn comes to market.
Yeah, I really think we've seen a lot of waves of products, right? So during the networking pre-dot-com bubble, right, we had the big networking boom where we had to interconnect everything together. We certainly weren't saving anyone's lives, but we were certainly connecting and bringing connectivity and disparate offices and businesses together globally. So that was pretty exciting. I don't think we saved anyone's life there. We went into the dot-com bubble, and then it was a lot of apps and a lot of clamoring for e-commerce and the convergence between the enterprise and accessibility. And I think that's one of the things that I think if you look at Amazon and eBay and these companies that are behemoth now were micro. In fact, I worked for a data center infrastructure company, and the top 100 most prolific e-commerce companies were our first customers. And so the who's who in the e-commerce space were in the infancy. We weren't saving anyone's life either. So now we're in this generation, I think, where we have this generation of consciousness, which is, what brands am I going to buy? What brand and companies am I going to invest in? And when you look at the millennials and the Generation Zs and Ys, I think they're going to be more cause driven and more conscious about how they invest, what products they buy. And it's almost like we're back to the 60s, and it's like we're going to have a movement. So when you answer your question is, how many of these companies are actually, consciously, going to make the world better? I'd say a fraction of them. It's not. It's become nomenclature, and I think it's misplaced, branding. But I think the younger generation is going to start making us go back to the basics of prove it to me.
Yeah.
Show me the impact.
That's where the story comes in. So let's talk a little bit about your process. You come into it as a journalist. You're working smack dab in the middle of Silicon Valley. You've been running your PR firm for quite a long time there. How do you go about extracting the proper story, the proper truthful story from your customers so that you can be sharing their narrative in the marketplace and help them avoid the pitfalls of a brand not telling their story well and the marketplace making up a narrative for them?
Yeah, I start by going back to the whole genesis or the roots of why. Like, why did they leave their corporate job or drop out of grad school or leave the prior venture, and really get to understand, the journey before they even decided to go to the drawing board. So what was the motivation? What was driving? Because that's usually where you're going to find the pivot, was made. I'm going to leave my day job. I'm going to drop out of grad school. I'm going to go from, being a top engineer to now being the CEO of a company with no experience sometimes, right? And then putting 100% of your back into it. I mean, over and over again, you've heard this as well. The entrepreneurial mentality. As I mortgaged my house, I maxed out my credit cards. I got rid of the dog. I got a cat. Whatever scenario it is, and really have to go back to that, because I think that with that empathetic moment when someone tells you that this is what they're going to do, there's so much passion there, and so that passion ultimately is going to drive what they do next. And what they do next is the creation, the visionary approach of, like, I'm going to make the future better. And then, that's the whiteboard conversation. Well, tell me why. Don't tell me how it works, because I can get manuals and read all that. But if we can get to the impact of how this is going to make a difference, and how is this going to improve something, and what you always talk about is, the but part, which I think is so important, is that how many people want to talk about the technology and the innovation, but they don't want to talk about the impact that it's making on the universe and for the rest of us, right? And so I think that's ultimately where, and this is oftentimes a coffee chat or a napkin chat, I call it, and kind of breaking it down and give an example. Interviewing somebody recently, and has an electric tractor company called Monarch. It's a fabulous company, but the journey really started when he was 12 years old. Fascination with transportation, and family, were farmers, but he didn't grow up thinking, I'm going to create, a platform and innovation for the future of farming. He went into transportation, but then ultimately the farming component backed into, his transportation world, and all of a sudden it's an overnight success, type of a story. But oftentimes people don't realize the journey that they've gone on, the thread, and I think you call it the red thread from one of your previous podcasts, which I love that.
Tamsin Webster. Yeah, she has a marvelous book out to that theme.
Yeah, love that. And the ability to be able to kind of thread these things, these different individual moments, into a continuous journey. And I think once I hear that, and this is part of the journalist approach, is then I can look for commonalities, and I can look for trends, and then it's like, so your motivation to creating this was really not because you just woke up one day and you said, I'm going to create something great. It's because you wanted to create and cause change, but there's nothing else in the market that could do it but your idea.
Your electric tractor story reminds me of James Watt, who created the steam engine. And he was a little kid, back in the 1700s, playing with a little kettle, and was fascinated by the steam coming out of that. And his aunt or grandmother was there, just saying, oh, you're wasting your time. You're never going to amount to anything. Stop staring at that stupid teapot. Get out and do some work and play and whatever. Well, that little moment in his life, he was so fascinated by that, is what led to the steam engine, and why we call electricity and measure it today by watts. It's because of this little kid that started looking at it. So it's really fascinating where these moments in time when we are very little have such an informed impression on us, where our curiosity and our passion has just taken off and led us down the road. And yet so many people are unwilling to talk about those moments. Do you find that working with some of your leaders, that they say, no one's interested in that, Donna? They don't want to hear that story. Let's just tell them how wonderful our tech is.
Yeah, typically it's nobody's asked them the question, which I find astounding. And it's like, wow, nobody's asked you, like, what was that moment? Like, was there an event when you were a child, or was it like a memory of, like, give you another example, motorcycle helmet company. There was the creator of an augmented reality motorcycle helmet that I had worked on forgot that he actually had an accident, which to me is so profound. So if you actually have created something and you had an accident that ultimately could impact, your future, your career, your life, in your whole juxtaposition of, of everything, I would remember that accident. I thought you didn't remember it, but it was like, oh, magic, So how do we factor that into the impact, which is not just a technology with this great platform, but it's like you're saving lives. You saved your life. You actually had a casualty. How do you inform and use that as a means to show the cause and effect of that? Now you potentially help save other lives. But the little small things like that sometimes just get dusted under.
How the best inventions come from that absolute need someone experience. And I guess it's not too surprising he forgot about it because he had a brain injury, it sounds like.
Well, yeah.
And so maybe that knocked it out of him, right?
Right?
Yeah. But I mean, these stories are absolutely everywhere. Just go and listen to Guy Raz on how I built this. I mean, that's what that entire podcast is built on, is why did you start this? And what was the motivation? And why were you so motivated that you went through thick and thin and you would have venture capitalists and bankers saying, you're nuts, we're not going to give you a dime, and you mortgaged everything to make it happen, but you stuck to it. I mean, it's just such a powerful story. Now you've got this process, the 6-step process in your storytelling development. Be relevant, be bold and fearless, think out of the box, listen to the market, be agile, gain speed are your 6 steps. When you work with a customer, do you take them in that order through those steps, or are you looking at them and applying the steps depending on where the client is in their current journey?
Yeah, it depends on where they are, what phase they are. Oftentimes, clients do not have an existing product to market, and others times they have a first generation product and it's just kind of going through its beta. But really need to look at the market is, I would say when I say look at the market, meaning the entire landscape, not just your competition, but other, potential contenders or aren't contenders. Oftentimes people work in a silo and they say, oh, I have the best and the greatest. It's like the Ringling Brothers Big Top, right? It's come to the circus. And then you're like, well, have you looked at your competition? And sometimes I get pitches on from companies and I will immediately think, have I seen this before? Do I need this? Did I see this at a big box store, or did I see this at a conference, or do I already have this? And then you realize, oh, it's similar, but it's not. And it's backing into, is there a market need, and then the impact that it has on the market. But the relevancy, I think, really comes into part of that customer exploration and looking at, the beta feedback and focus groups. And oftentimes people don't even do that. They just automatically skip and they say, oh, we've proven it internally that it's great, and therefore we're ready to market. So when it comes to, the bold and fearless, there I really look into is being bold and fearless in how you talk about your story. Is oftentimes in the Silicon Valley and tech companies, they play it very safe. And I think when you look at more of the Procter and Gamble approach to bringing innovation and technology to market and humanizing it and bringing the human factor and that user experience into the discussion, I think it makes it far more tangible and interesting to talk about a augmented reality or artificial intelligence or robotics or autonomous, because some of these technologies are just a little weird, right? And so you need to humanize and bring that human component into it. And then the think out of the box is, it's anything from, creating the real relevant content, such as, getting motorcycle racers to ride a motorcycle versus just your engineering team, right? Or getting a celebrity who is a diehard motorcyclist, to try out a motorcycle and be able to use that real life experience and that user experience moment. But I think the biggest one, and you talk about this a lot in your approach, is the, listening to the market and really knowing the opportunity that you have, within the marketplace. Because if you don't understand and you don't keep track to, what's happening in the market and what's your feedback from your customers, you're not going to be agile. You're not going to be able to respond quick. You're not going to be able to be agile to social commentary. You're not going to be able to be agile to, the market crashes, or all of a sudden product components are stuck out in the ocean in customs because there was a delay, for manufacturing. So there's a lot of worst case scenarios that I think we always have to factor in, that people don't think about in the beginning. They wait when it happens. So being predictive And preventative, I think, is another key component. When I say be agile, it's like the market, but what's the worst case scenario that could happen as well? You mentioned Guy Raz. I love Guy. And I think one of the reasons I love him and inspires me to listen to these unicorn stories, but I I call it the acorn story, which is these young fledglings that are we're going to become these majestic oaks. And I tailored my podcast series around that idea of that moment that happened before it happened, before you brought it to market, before you had that big idea. And that's really zooming in what we were talking about earlier is where do you start? And getting that authentic, genuine conviction and that moment where you said, aha, I think I'm actually going to change something.
And I love
but I don't have any money. No,
I love that juxtaposition of acorn versus unicorn. I don't know if that's a Silicon Valley saying or that's something you came up with. I love that. That is, and so you're focusing on the acorn to grow to a majestic oak. Acorn versus, I think it is too. And your podcast before it happened, I think, is absolutely fascinating because you get to really focus on the why. I want to go back to something you said earlier in your 6-step process, this idea of be bold and fearless. And I want to ask you if you've seen this trend. So I just literally got off the phone with my good buddy, Brian Burkhart, who's over at Square Planet, and he's here in Arizona too. And he does a lot of work in corporate show production and sales strategy training and that kind of thing. And he and I were talking about a live session we've got coming up in a little bit. And he sort of was moaning and groaning today. And I've seen this too. He goes, why is everyone all of a sudden so shy? No one is willing to take a risk. They don't want to put themselves out there, and they are not being bold and fearless. And he and I just kind of threw a few ideas out there. I thought, number one, could it be COVID and pandemic brain that everyone is just so freaking exhausted of looking at this amorphous virus that may or may not kill you, that you may or may not need a vaccine for, that you may or may not have to wear a mask, that we don't understand that it actually is like pervading how we communicate in the world. It was like, we just don't know anymore. And then number two, if you add on to that social media, the fear of being shamed online. I mean, everything from the Me Too movement and everything else that people are just calling people out for all kinds of different reasons, relevant and non-relevant reasons, that people in this day and age seem to becoming less bold and less fearless. And I'm just curious if you've seen that in your world too.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of fear. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day. The number one fashion item is not something that you would expect. Men are not wearing collared shirts, button-down shirts. They're wearing T-shirts. What is known as business casual, at least in the Valley, it's known as business casual. Wall Street would not be business casual, but business casual, collared, band T-shirt, no collar, not a polo shirt, with a sports coat is now the new norm. So there is this little bit of this kind of scaling back and I think of not being flashy and not being bold and having a little bit of fear of like, I don't know. Should I leave my home office? Should I leave my home? Do I go to work today? And I go to my office and it's a little bit of a ghost town, not just my space, but the entire building space. So I think right now I would use the word cautious. People are being bold and cautious and maybe not as fearless because we're all kind of in this wait and see mode. I know consumer buying trends and things that I've seen in terms of what people are buying, people are still buying and they're using, obviously Amazon has done very well, very prolific during the pandemic. But speaking to people around the world, whether it's the UK or the Middle East and different places where I have clients and speak to media, I think the word is cautious. So how do we take a cautious buyer and have them buy something that maybe they might put off till tomorrow?
Well, is the buyer cautious or is the brand cautious? Because I know a lot of people that are still buying as much as they ever bought, even with and without jobs going on. That doesn't seem to impact it. It seems like the brands themselves and the stories that they're willing to tell are much more cautious than they used to be, and probably are doing them a disservice in that process.
Yeah, if you go back to the famous, Apple computer commercial with the Super Bowl one with the mallet, you probably know the name of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the 1986 famous one. It ran one time, basically, and
Yeah,
and they're
that was
taking on
bold.
the big corporate giants, the overseers, and said, "Look at you, we can
Right.
free you from this." Yeah.
Yeah, that was bold and fearless. If that ad was to run today, it might scare a few people. I think empathy, and as I mentioned earlier, the younger generation is starting to influence of the millennials think and operate differently, and the generation disease and the Ys do as well. So how is that, that type of buying, that user experience and and adoption, going to change? As I said, I think to me it's a little bit like the 60s over again, is that people think, they're challenging authority, they're challenging, their father and their parents' thinking. It's this, this movements and how we eat and what we drive and what we wear, sustainability and organic and vegan and all these not vegans and all these different movements that are happening within vertical markets. I think is a little bit of a bold and cautious movement, and the consumer is driving a lot of that. But I think what brands need to understand is that knowing that the market and the buyers change during a crisis like we've been in.
Yeah, but doesn't every generation rail against the generation before them, mom and dad? Every generation does that. These generations aren't special in that aspect, I don't think. But what I think has really changed is how delicately now and how politically correct now we have to speak in the stories we tell. And to me, they get very watered down because there's no nuance, there's no fun, there's no insights. Everybody takes everything so literally and offensively. Now, I'm not for going out and being offensive to anybody ever. But when you watch comedians, good comedians, and my wife and I prefer the ones that aren't throwing F-bombs down every moment. We like the good, clean comedians. When they are funny, they have an edge. They are taking a stance in an issue going on or an observation that they're making in the world. I'm thinking of Nat.
Or help ease pain.
Nate Borghese is a good example of it. The Tennessee kid, he is hysterical, and he never has to throw out an F-bomb to get himself there. But he takes issue with a lot of things. To me, long way of saying this, Donna, is how do you work with your clients when they have to tell a tough story, a critical story? It's got to have nuance to it, and they may offend some part of the market out there that maybe isn't ever going to be one of their buyers anyways, but they don't mean to offend them. The market's just going to take it that way. How do you work with that? Because when you water everything down, it becomes really boring storytelling.
Yeah, well, you have to lead with empathy. I think is one of the key things is knowing. It's the same way Clinton used to talk about poverty, or and people say, well, what would he know about poverty? He's been a diplomat for a long time. Well, because that he would bring you into the stories. I know what it's like to feel talk to be hungry. I know what it's like to feel a young child that has malnourished, and bring you into, so in a realistic empathetic way, is you really need to have empathy and understand, but knowing that impact, it's never easy to articulate a crisis, right? It doesn't make any difference. When I was a news reporter, I would be in the newsroom and I would get a call, 747 went down, I had to call the president of Boeing, I need to get a quote at 4 a.m. That is not an easy conversation to have, nor is it an easy conversation to reclaim a product because, it had, salmonella or, some other E. coli or just something that's just tragic. But you have to lead with, and we understand, that you are affected by this, but we're doing everything we can to fix the problem or to change it. Therefore, you have our back or something like that. I'm sure you can
now we're
perfect
talking
that.
crisis communications. I totally
Yeah.
get that. But what if you're taking a product to market? Who do you think, let me ask it this way, who do you think is doing a good job in the tech world of walking that line of getting noticed because they're being bold, they are being edgy, they're not being offensive, but they are on that fence of they could potentially be offensive to some? Because everyone is so oversensitive this day and age, but are doing a good job of making that connection.
Yeah, I'm working with a company that I think is a great example. They're based in Canada. It's called Damon Motors, and they're an electric high performance motorcycle. There are other electric motorcycles in the market, but not with the same tech and innovation. But ultimately, it's created quite a stir in the traditional rider community. So the diehard Harley riders are offended, by why would you want electric? And if you go look at the Damon Motors site, you'll see this beautiful Ducati, very well designed motorcycle. You'll see a whole culture and a lifestyle around the motorcycle, and it is creating a whole new generation. They're ticking off a lot of people in the marketplace because it is different. It is bold. It is badass. It is fearless, and it is all really thought, innovation out of the box. But the
and
marketing
relevant,
is,
I might add.
yeah, and irrelevant. And so during the last couple of years, I mean, this is a company that has sold more than 40 million in orders before the products shipped. So there was a very bold statement. I think in general, Apple, continues to be a company that listens to the market, listens to the users, and gives us what we want, right? I also think I really appreciate and like the work that Amazon kind of blows my mind in terms of most people don't think them as a tech company, but as a early e-commerce platform for books that evolved into basically the universal marketplace, and content and creating products, right? It just still blows my mind because way back when I remember going into a meeting with Jeff Bezos, going to the whiteboard and describing the Amazon platform, and everything that he said he was going to deliver, the company's delivered. But it was so futuristic and so far out there, we were focusing on books. And so to me, being able to kind of push the limits. I fly. I'm a pilot. I'm a private pilot, and so I also look at what's happening in the aviation and aerospace world and the convergence of what's happening. I mentioned tractors earlier. I work with a company called Monarch Tractor. Monarch actually brings the best of breed of transportation, as well as knowledge from aerospace, artificial intelligence, and agriculture into one amazing autonomous smart tractor. And that's a long way from John Deere. But not everybody, is embracing that either, because they're like, well, I'm a dedicated farmer. I have my inherited my tractor from my father and my grandfather, and it's fine. But when you tell them one tractor is equal, fossil fuel tractor is equal to 17 cars, and if you take 17 cars off the road, then the story becomes, something that people cause driven. But I think there is fear. It's like, what is this going to do? Is this going to reduce, labor? Actually, it's going to give you a farmhand. That's the upside. Is it going to, what's this going to do to impede my crops? Actually, it's going to help you better manage the quality of crops. And ultimately, it's actually going to be the benefit down to the consumer, us, so that I have better tasting quality food that was, brought to market, with less pesticides and where hopefully no pesticides and with consciousness.
It's funny you talk about that tractor. What Monarch tractors I think is really interesting. It reminds me of a company called Brock, which is a Swedish manufacturer of remote control demolition equipment.
Mm.
Some friends of mine's worked. They're head of North and South American sales and did some branding work for them many, many years ago. And it was interesting because they could bring in these little vehicles about the size of a Volkswagen or smaller, has this big boom arm on it and this hammer that could just tear apart anything and everything in the demolition business. And they could prove that they would go in and they could replace 10 men on jackhammers with one guy or gal for that matter, operating a Brock remote control demolition piece of equipment. They could get the work done 20 times faster. Now, totally safe because you don't have 10 people standing around rubble and stuff falling down around them. And the argument was, okay, well, what do I do with the 9 other guys? We've just unemployed 9 other guys. I said, no, you can do so much of this work. You just put each one of them on a Brock and you can 10 times your business. Your margins go through the roof because you can charge the same, if not more, for the work. You get it done in a fraction of the amount of time with that total safety. And there, so it's funny. People were pushing back against them. Their anti-story was, well, you're going to put people out of work. No, you're actually going to build a business where you can employ even more people in a much safer, more environmentally friendly way. And so it's kind of that same sort of Monarch Tractors story, isn't it? You have to be able to paint the picture of what tomorrow looks like because you're always up against that anti-story. Even with the Damon Motors, who cares if they piss off Harley Davidson riders? Maybe that's not even their market, or it's a one little slim part of their market. I mean, and pissing them off, they really get to design their category, don't they?
Yeah, well, and women, more women are riding, so that's interesting too. Is what women actually, are willing to ride those Harleys, or I used to ride, and then I could never handle a Harley, and I could do a little Triumph, a little 250, 350 maybe, but with caution. But when you start putting, smart technology and learning and being able to learn my writing style and I, help me, kind of canvas, all of my surroundings. It makes it safer and it makes it, smarter than maybe driving, other two-wheel vehicles or including a bicycle or all the way, to these tripods and the younger generation's growing up on scooters everywhere, right? And so now where do you go? The Uber and Lyft generation isn't necessarily going to go out and buy a car.
Absolutely.
And so this is, this becomes, an alternative. Yesterday, I was driving by Moffett Field, which is also where Google, puts their planes. And I was on a highway and I thought, what the heck is that flying above me? Because I pay attention to the sky as much as I pay attention to the ground because I love planes. And I couldn't tell. Maybe somebody could tell, but I could not tell. Was it a helicopter? Was it a plane? I think it was an autonomous test plane. From I don't Google or somebody else in the valley, but it was kind of this omnipotent kind of being coming from the sky. It didn't land like a helicopter. It didn't look like it was going to land like a plane. And I was just trying to figure out. And I thought, what an amazing time that we live in, that someone is constantly thinking about that next level. Hopefully, I got to make it not just better, faster, smarter, but I got to make it more conscious, consciously better. I mean, maybe this was the next generation medical helicopter, or it's an autonomous, pet rescuer. I don't know what it was, but I would like to think it was something meaningful and not just some like wacky, the Great American. What was that movie? The Great American Race, with all the cars and inventions. Or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, or any of these other
Mad World. Is it that
Mad World? Yeah, that movie. And so it was a little like that. It was not quite Mad Max. It was more like the Mad World. And I was like, at this moment, I still don't know what it was. So only in the valley, I guess, is all I could say. But I really, I was kind of curious. Like, I mean, maybe it's the next Rescue Ranger. That'd be cool.
Let's wrap this by going back in time. In honor of your podcast, before it happened, you have obviously done a lot of things. You run this very successful PR firm up in the Silicon Valley. You're an airplane pilot, a motorcycle rider. You've done a lot of things. What was it? Can you take us to a moment in your time, the why you do what you do in trying to humanize tech?
Yeah. Well, it started a long time ago. Just my father owned the community, and his brothers owned the community papers and the printing businesses in the valley. And so I was a childhood reporter, literally in my pen and pad, age 10 through 13, would go out and interview farmers and mom and pop shops and go to HP. I went to FMC and the very early makings of some other Tech Valley companies. But I didn't want anything to do with tech. So when I went off to journalism school, I was going to work for the FCC or with some other facet of broadcast and communications. But I came back out after working for the BBC and Reuters and came out west and the chips. But what fascinated me was the unraveling of all the content and data that was given to me in stacks. And I was fascinated that I needed to figure it out. And in not necessarily an analytical way, but in a story way, the same way I did as a reporter. It's like, tell me why versus how. Why does this going to make my life better? And we're talking chips, which ultimately then became Ethernet adapter boards and networking equipment, and then went into the digital age of all this word processing and then the IoT and the autonomous. And it doesn't make any difference. It's the same, asking the same questions and being able to the discovery process of why. Why is this going to impact? How is this going to change? Not how is it going to work? I am fascinated, and I'm going to geek out on technology, including my own piston engine. I know how to take it apart and put it back together, popular mechanic style. But what's more important is why. Why do I need to know how my engine works? It's because in case I have a crisis or if I'm stranded someplace, I can fix it, right? And I think that's one of the key things that just continuously feeds me is that there is this unstoppable creativity in emerging tech and technology market that 10, 15, 20 years from now, things that you and I might talk about are going to blow our mind because they're just different approaches to possibly solving an old problem, but hopefully at a rate speed and maybe of a low cost. I'm a late adopter when it comes to technology. I wait till the price drops. I don't buy it when it first comes out. I didn't get the first Walkman. I got the next generation Walkman. It's just all that. And even with my kids, I used to tell them, "No, you can't get the Game Boy or Game Girl yet, or the Wii Fit. Wait till the price drops, right?" And I think that's one of the things I'm seeing now with electric. Is like you have a competition. Tesla is kind of the de facto in cars, but you got Polestar from Volvo, which I saw for the first time at a car show like 7 years ago, and they're now giving the market a challenge. And I think we're going to keep seeing more of that challenge, but I love emerging tech and innovation because I think that it the curiosity component of like, well, do I need this? And if I do need this, then show me why I need this. How is it going? Internet of Things, is another category. I don't know how. Do you know how many Internet of Things devices that you have in your house?
Oh God, I would say 1,000. I have no idea. Everything seems to be hooked up.
Well, there's detection, security detection products out in the market, and one of them I acquired, and I found out that I had 300 and some in my home that I didn't even know that I had. I was thinking I had maybe 15, but it's profound how dominant that is now. And it's like, why do I need all this? I don't need all this. So how do I actually sort out and vet out what it is that I do need? Have you watched the former Gear Patrol Jeremy in his show on the farm?
No, I haven't.
I gotta think of the name of the farm, but he went from constantly looking at the highest performance cars and getting taking gear patrol out on the road and whether motorcycles or cars, and now he's actually gone back old school. He's on a farm fully working farm, and he's actually changed his entire lifestyle, and he has become a farmer, and he's going back to his roots of becoming a farmer. And I think what he's doing and what I feel I do every day is I kind of back to every day living my core genesis of getting the story and really dissecting and kind of pulling that thread. I'm going to use the thread analogy again, pulling the thread and keep pulling it until it unravels and you're like, now we actually have something.
That one word, why, sounds like the first stepping stone into humanizing your offering, because it's not what you make, but it's what you make happen in people's lives.
Absolutely. Well, we're getting close to Halloween, but I remember as a kid, trick-or-treating was painful for my sisters. I'm the youngest of 4, but I would go trick-or-treating. And for me, trick-or-treating was the door would open and my first curiosity would be, wow, is that a Black Forest clock? Is that an Andy Warhol painting? Oh, wow, what's that? What kind of china is that? And my sister was just the candy. And I was just so enamored that there was always something behind that door to me that was far more interesting than the candy. So there you go. That's my curiosity. Started at a very young age.
So you're a forensic storyteller. You go in and you look through the anthropology of what's going on. You dig through all the data and you turn that data into drama to humanize a tech brand.
Well, I was an investigative journalist, so that was, that I want to say Nancy Drew type of was always there. And it's tempered a little bit, in the business world, but I think what you do and what I do is really needed to help companies keep the integrity and the authenticity of being able to tell a solid story.
Well, Donna, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and sharing your story with us. Where can people find out more about you?
On LinkedIn at Donna Loughlin, and that's Loughlin, or LMGPR.com, which stands for Leadership, Momentum, and Growth. And then the podcast is Before It Happened.
How long have you been doing your podcast?
The podcast launched in June. And we have had so much fun. We are booked and locked in the vault all the way through the end of the year. But we are guests of everything from a lot of innovators and futurists, but I even have, celebrity foodies like Tyler Florence. It was known as a celebrity chef, but he's more than that. He's really about the future of food. And Carla Mondavi of the wine legacy family, and talks about the future of farming and responsibility and sustainability. I have the women who designed the sports bra. And I have just so many interesting people that are sharing their back end story of why before it happened. The acorns.
You are giving Guy Raz a run for his money instead of how I built it. It's why I built it.
Yeah, I love Guy.
Yeah, it's a great show. So, well, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I learned so much from you in our conversation. And I think everybody needs to apply the ABT and practice.
The and button, therefore. Yeah, the ABTs of Selling is our online course, and it's only 18 minutes long. It's just 3 short videos of me taking you through the and statement of agreement, the but statement of contradiction, and the therefore statement of consequence, which, by the way, that agreement, contradiction, consequence are the 3 primal forces of storytelling. And without it, you're not really telling a very powerful story. So, and I think you went through that, didn't you, Donna? You took the course?
I did. I got my certificate and I had to keep practicing because to me, it's like a vitamin. It's like once a day. It's has to be part of the regime. And so I think once you go through the trifecta of what you mapped out and you start applying it, I even challenged my daughter. I said, what do you think? And I think it's one of those things that you have to, it's like exercise. You have to insert it in, as a regime. And I think that's, I thank you for that because I think it's very simple, but it's very powerful.
Oh, great. It is muscle memory without a doubt. Having learned it from Dr. Randy Olson way back when, he teaching it to the science and academic world, the one thing we've learned over all these years of teaching it in business world as well is you're right. You got to practice it over and over, and you build this narrative intuition of setup problem resolution, which our cause and effect primal brain absolutely loves. It's all happening, playing in the background in our subconscious, in our limbic system. But if you can connect with that, regardless of what story you are telling about what brand, be it technology or otherwise, you have a better chance of really hooking into them and getting them leaning in. One of the best ways to practice the and button, therefore, is in your email writing. And I mentioned that in the course. Write 3 emails every single day at a minimum, beginning with an ABT. You'll find you'll shorten your emails by 2/3. Your reader will actually understand what you are asking of them, and it has a built-in call to action in the therefore statement. So yeah, you can use it pretty much everywhere.
I think you have created a tribe, and I'm going to now be a member of the tribe. So I'm very excited about that.
I'm glad to have you here, both as a tribe member for the ABT and on the business of story. And, for those of you listening in, if you haven't tried it, check it out. I'm at businessofstory.thinkific.com. You can download the course. Plus, we also have the companion book that Randy and I co-authored called The Narrative Gem for Business. It's a 75-page guide, and it takes you deeper into the ABT.
Love the book.
You've been using it, and you've used the if-then
I read it
clause
twice.
and the what-how tool. And
I'm working on it.
Yeah. Practice.
It's like, it doesn't make any difference. I've had my agency for 20 years. I've been in the industry for, probably close to 30, but it's just, exercise. It's like, okay, you got to ride a bike or you got to jog, right? Are you gonna, do Pilates or you got to go to yoga? Pick what works for you. But I think you created a really great framework that simplifies a lot of the components that marketeers and storytellers are using daily, but you put it in a framework that makes it unexcusable to not have it as part of your regime.
Well, thank you for that. And I found that same power when Randy showed it to me almost 10 years ago now. And, in the category of storytelling and storytelling coaching and so forth, I started like so many people do with the complex hero's journey and the story cycle system, which works really fabulously for brand story strategy development. And I found the 5 primal elements of a short story for big impact. And I got to give a tip of the hat to the Anecdote folks out in Melbourne, Australia, for revealing that framework. But it really boiled down to this ABT. And I have since learned that everything starts with this ABT. It's simpler, it's more powerful. Get that down, and all the rest of the more complex storytelling frameworks will be much, much easier to use if you have to use them. The ABT you can pretty much use on every kind of messaging you need to have happen.
Awesome. Totally agree.
And with that, folks, we're going to let you go, but we want you back here next Monday when we'll have another amazing story artist right here for you, like Donna, so that we can help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.